Christopher Nolan's long-awaited atomic epic Oppenheimer is now arriving. Now, I saw it in stunning 70mm IMAX, and I sat through all 3 hours and 9 seconds of this drama. Is this going to be Nolan's magnum opus? Now, one thing before I dive into my review, I know there's been a lot of confusion online about critics, influencers, and the current strike that's going on in Hollywood. Now, first, let me say I 100% stand with and support the WGA and SAG-AFTRA in their pursuit of fair and needed changes in salaries, working conditions, residuals, just everything. The WGA and SAG-AFTRA have both come out and stated very clearly that critics don't fall under the strike in any way, as we're not actually promoting the works, but instead are offering meaningful critiques on the art, and then we're not paid by any studio to talk about the movies or shows. I hope that you're going to stand with the writers and actors so that they can attain their incredibly reasonable and fair requests. All right, now on to my review. Oppenheimer tells the story of American theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer and his role in the development of the atomic bomb. Okay, so while it stars Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Robert Downey Jr., and Matt Damon, there are so many other actors that appear in this that it would really take just way too long and become very boring for me to list them all. Suffice it to say, though, that in just about every frame, I was noticing a new but familiar face. I love how stacked the cast is, and even if a character had a very minor role, it was fun to see him on such a huge project. So as I said, I saw this in 70mm IMAX on a 5-story screen, and while the aspect ratio constantly changes throughout the film, when it goes full screen, the imagery is nothing short of stunning. Portions are in a widescreen format, and when we need to see expansive locations or maybe the grandeur and massiveness of an area, the picture goes full screen to just completely dominate our field of view. Now, I am curious how this is going to look on a non-IMAX screen, or even on an IMAX that doesn't have 70mm. Now, even before we see an explosion, we're shown images of particles and embers as they float chaotically but rhythmically across the screen. The colors are typically very vibrant, which then stand out all the more against the utterly black backdrop. And something that's wonderfully visually is that when we're watching certain aspects of the story, the presentation is in black and white, and these two are breathtaking. I mean, the depth of the blacks and the grays, it's somewhat mesmerizing, and then it makes the scenes enveloping. Cillian Murphy, he is brilliant in this. And while he's not totally shown as a hero, he is displayed as a human being, flawed, insightful, and sometimes charismatic. But making him human rather than lifting him up as infallible and perfect, he then becomes very relatable and sympathetic. And not all of his actions are noble or honorable, but there is a sense of honesty that's portrayed as he knowingly struggles with his thoughts and actions. And one thing that really stood out to me was his ability to express the moral dilemmas that he wrestled with in his mind. The emotion that's captured in his eyes, it just speaks volumes. And while there are portions when Murphy isn't actually speaking, his eyes are shouting his thoughts loud and clear. And Matt Damon is another standout in this. He doesn't have nearly the same amount of screen time as Murphy, but his presence is wonderful. There's a charm that Damon has that just comes across in all of his acting, even if he's not playing somebody that we are meant to fully be behind. I mean, he's able to draw us in with his sincerity. And the matter-of-fact attitude that he brings to his soldier character, it's convincing, and it balances well against Murphy's science-based background. I was a little shocked at how much screen time and story prevalence Robert Downey Jr. had in this. And while it's hard to separate him totally from his Tony Stark character, he is wonderful to watch because of just the hubris that his character displays. The pride and self-assuredness, it's both impressive and sickening, and RDJ captures it flawlessly. And he's a character that we love to hate if given the chance. And he's also played with a smarmy angle, which then makes him even more of a robust and nuanced character. Florence Pugh has a small but significant role, and I like the darkness of her character. She brings a level of complication to the story, and while that complication probably would still exist without her character, Pugh and Murphy, they have a good and dysfunctional chemistry together. And finally, with Emily Blunt, she doesn't have a ton of story time, but when she's on screen, she absolutely sells the performance. There are very subtle characteristics she displays that give us huge insight into her character's state of mind. And I love how much passion she brings to her character. As Oppenheimer's wife, she's explosive and intense, and makes a great match for the quiet of Oppenheimer. I mean, their dynamic works, even if it's not always healthy. Now, despite this being 3 hours and 9 seconds, which I know is just a funny fact, but Nolan made a big deal of actually putting that out, I was fully enthralled in the story. And this takes us through a large portion of Oppenheimer's life, and it's told as sort of a mystery or even a courtroom drama, even though there isn't any courtroom. And the level of detail we get in his story, I thought was incredible, showing how things in his past haunt his present, especially where governmental clearance is concerned. Now, sometimes the narrative felt like it was packing in too much information, but as the story progressed and more context was provided, the scenes began to fall into place, rounding out the story angles, which then created some really robust plot lines. Now, something Nolan has always utilized well in his movies is the score to just elicit energy and emotion. And here it's no different. The score is by Ludwig Göransson, and there is so much to love about it. I mean, something that really stood out to me was the use of intermingled sounds with the score to then create urgency and even dread. For example, as the bomb is being constructed and then loaded for testing, the music is swelling and building just with all this intensity, and then sprinkled throughout are sounds of a Geiger counter. I mean, it's subtly reminding us that what we're watching is radioactive and insanely dangerous. And there are also several times when the music crescendos to such a point that you almost want to cover your ears. And it's meant to be somewhat deafening as it matches the internal thoughts and fears of Oppenheimer. And masterfully, there are also sequences of silence, and that too can be deafening as we just wait with anticipation for what's coming, allowing that silence to almost suck the air out of the room, kind of like the initial explosion of the bomb before the shockwave then travels out to decimate everything in its path. Now, something that is of issue is the balance between musical score volume and dialogue. Now, it's not nearly as bad as it was in Tenet, because throughout most of this dialogue, it's very discernible and audible. But there are some key moments where we're meant to hear the words being spoken because of just their story importance, but I found myself really struggling to hear what was being said over the volume of that score. Now, I wish this wasn't the case because in these instances, I was broken out of the story and then immediately aware of my surroundings. The illusion of the story disappeared, and then I had to enter back into it. At times also, the camera work was a little distracting as a shallower depth of field was utilized, causing some of the subjects to fall out of focus, especially on close-ups where it's also the most noticeable. Now, this wasn't an issue consistently throughout the film, but towards the end of the movie, it did become more prevalent. Now, something I wasn't expecting in this is that there are essentially two stories being told. They intertwine all throughout, but there is a distinct point that felt like the movie had reached its climax and was beginning to wrap up, only then to continue on for about an hour more. Now, I was still completely invested in the narrative, and I was loving the building intrigue and tension, but it was a noticeable shift in the storytelling that could make the movie seem even longer than it is for some. I think the convergence of the storytelling, it works very well, and actually it creates a somewhat suspenseful arc. I also enjoyed the events that then unfolded and how they influenced the rest of the story. And this ends up being a thrilling drama with phenomenal acting, and it's all topped off with a stunning and artistically shot explosion. The fear, dread, destruction, and even beauty, they're all captured in this phenomenal column of fire. Overall, Oppenheimer's a captivating story, wonderfully helmed by Christopher Nolan and expertly led by Cillian Murphy. The cinematography is magnificent, capturing the awesome power of a bomb while also showcasing the vulnerability and flaws of the humans that created it. While the camera's focus on subject is sometimes a little soft and the audio is a little out of balance at times, the musical score is emotionally moving and thrilling, guiding us through the excitement of discovery with the urgency of a looming countdown. There's sex and nudity, a lot of profanity, and just a little bit of violence. I give Oppenheimer 4.5 out of 5 couches. So are you excited for this film? Do you have a favorite Christopher Nolan movie? Now, Interstellar is one of my all-time favorites, and I also really love The Prestige, but I'd love to know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me. Also, I wanted to give a quick shout out to TK, who I met tonight. It was great to meet you. I hope you had a blast at the premiere. All right, take care.